Goth has always been a very political subculture, but it's not in the way that you would necessarily think, and it requires a little bit of nuance in order to understand. So let's talk about it. So there's a number of books that I really enjoyed reading and I think are very relevant to this conversation. There's Goth, A History by Lol Tolhurst, the original drummer of The Cure, as well Cured by the same author. This is probably the most important book to getting a general sense of the subculture, which is Somewhere Leather, Somewhere Lace by Andi, Harriman, and Marloes Bontje. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but this is a fantastic book. A really phenomenal book that I enjoyed thoroughly is Cathi Unsworth's Season of the Witch. This is a really great memoir of a goth growing up into the scene during that time and her reflections on what it means to be goth and, you know, what the scene truly is. And Hemlock, A Night of Deathrock by Javi Nunez. This is a really great, just sort of generalized view at death rock, which is a subgenre of goth rock. And I think this gives a lot of really good insights to the political nature of the music, especially within the death rock realm. And as well, A Kiss Across the Ocean. This is a really great book that explores the sort of connection between post-punk music and especially goth to Latinx culture and queer Latin culture, things like that. Really phenomenal read. Also, Burning Down the House by Tim Mohr. This is a really great book about the fall of the Berlin Wall and how the punk rock movement affected change politically within the cultural sphere in Berlin. And Who Killed Mr. Moonlight? A memoir about Bauhaus by David J. Haskins. A really amazing book. I could go into pages and start referencing individual aspects of each of these books, but I find that that would be a little bit arduous and it's a little too granular. So I'd rather talk about the bigger, broader picture that is contained by understanding the context of all of these books. So right up top, one big thing that we really have to acknowledge when it comes to goth is that when goth was created, it wasn't called goth. Goth, spurring from post-punk, which came from punk rock, wasn't really a cohesive, coherent movement to begin with. Whereas punk started self-identifying as punks relatively early in the incipient stage of the music scene and cultural movement, goth didn't really come into fashion and vogue as being called goth until the mid to late 80s in a lot of ways. There's a very murky time in goth's history from like 1979 to about 1982 or 83, where it was just a collection of really extravagant theatrical weirdos that were making really different music that had never really been achieved in a sense that it was coalescing in a cultural way where people could identify with each other. It wasn't a thing where people were saying, oh, let's go to the goth rock show or anything like that. People were just making art. And most of that art, especially when you look at stuff that was coming out of England in the late 70s and early 80s, was a reflection on two major factors. Number one, post-war austerity. You had massive austerity measures where people were incredibly poor after the war. England had been obliterated in a large way because of the Blitz and the bombing, and there were government-imposed austerity measures where you would only have so much access to certain resources at certain times. And that created a lot of systemic poverty. As we know in capitalist societies, the rich tend to get richer and the poor just get more poor. The other major factor, which is again a very political factor, is that you had Thatcherism occurring in England. There was a movement of people that were espousing more and more traditional values, kind of hearkening back to days of former glory, and they offset a lot of those problems on dissidents and ne'er-do-wells and people leeching off of society. Sounds a lot like today, honestly. Under Thatcherism, and then in the United States, Ronald Reagan and Reaganomics, we had a massive disparity in wealth start to be created. The bridge between the haves and the have-nots started to get extremely long. When you read books like Goth, A History by Lol Tolhurst, you start to realize that there are large swaths of this book and many of the other books that I've mentioned that specifically talk about the era of desperation because of the socio-political situation that was occurring in England. Also very much so mentioned here in Hemlock, talking about the California scenes and being anti-capitalist and anti-consumerist culture within the Deathrock scene. Lol Tolhurst even mentions this book, Burning Down the House by Tim Mohr, because the punk rock scene was directly tied to what they were doing within the post-punk and goth movement in the early stages. Now, how does this relate to today? Now, there's a couple things that we have to really consider about what's going on today. First and foremost, subculture is the term that we're considering when it comes to goth. It is a culture. It changes. Culture always does change. It has norms, ethics, morals. There are many different threads of the tapestry that create a subculture, and they do change from time to time. But there are some things that are essential. To pull those threads away from that tapestry would be to destroy it. In every single one of these books, it is a very regular occurrence to read about people feeling different and feeling marginalized by society, feeling disenfranchised by society, and then finding this subculture where they feel a tangible connection to other people who've experienced that disenfranchisement. It is at its center a very anti-consumerist, anti-status quo, and anti-establishment mentality of thought that is dyed into the wool of what makes goth goth. And therein lies kind of the problem with the politics of goth, is that it's not explicit or overt. It is nuanced and subtle, but still very much so present. I don't think that goth has ever or will ever say you need to vote for party X or do this politically in a very overt and explicit sort of way. But again, the culture at large gives it its own definition by having a generalized left and right limit to what is acceptable within the confines of the culture. And from there, we can get a little bit more explicit about talking about the current day politics of who should or should not be participating. And it's not that there's going to be somebody standing at the door saying you can't come in, but the culture will regulate itself. Case in point, somebody that is a very hardline, right-wing, alt-right, MAGA Republican, in essence has no place to participate in this culture because the inherent belief system that is espoused by MAGA and right-wing Republicans and alt-right and right-wingers is just simply incompatible. Almost all of these books explore queerness as a major aspect of the participation within the goth subculture. The gender-bending fluidity is absolutely and undeniably an aspect of participating within the goth subculture. What I think we're witnessing nowadays with this rise of people being online saying that they are conservative goths or alt-right goths, these are people that have no bearing over the actual scene, over the actual subculture that is occurring outside of a phone or a computer. I live in the deep south in Athens, Georgia, where the city itself is a fairly progressive place, but there is a massive number of incredibly hardline conservative people all around us. And yet, if you were to show up at our goth night that we do in Athens, and you started espousing MAGA ideology or being transphobic or horrific to women or whatever, you would be immediately ejected from that event. There would be no questions asked. You would just be gone. And I guarantee you it is very much so the case in pretty much every goth night that isn't usurped by people that have that ideology, which is like slim to none. And those groups that do emerge out in the actual real world or in any sort of cohesive group sentiment, they end up cannibalizing each other anyway because they don't understand the inherent nature of the subculture, because they've not done the research, they've not read the books, they've not enjoyed the actual essence of what makes the subculture special and amazing. The last thing I really want to say about all this, though, is there's a lot of trends of people in the goth community online making videos that go viral all the time, where it's just a caption that just blatantly states, you cannot be conservative and goth. And yes, we know this. It is so flagrantly obvious, but there's no real discourse, there's no analysis, there's no thought behind it. It's just sort of a blanket statement, and we're all in agreement. We've all kind of done this, I think, at some point. I've done it. Every person that has any sort of social media has put up a statement like that at one point or another, and there's nothing inherently wrong with it. I think that we should just be spending more time and energy creating things that actually input to the goth subculture and the music than just making social media videos where we look cool. Make a very blatantly obvious statement over and over and over again. Above all else, the only thing that actually really matters when it comes to goth subculture or any subculture or really anything this day and age is your actual real world participation in things. The irony is definitely not lost on me every time I say that because I'm making videos about these things, but I challenge you to log off, get off your phone, get off your computer, and go to the goth night, go to the thing, go to the meetup, go meet people. And if you are not able to do that because of disability or any other thing going on in your life, you can also make your input to the world without just making these blanket statements that we all sort of nod our head in agreement on. Make music, make art, make your own DIY fashion, do things that advance and challenge the subculture in and of itself, because that's what makes it better. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this. I really want to know what you have to say and what you think and feel about all this. So comment below, hit the subscribe thing, you know what to do, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I appreciate you, and you're wonderful, and you're valuable, and as always, stay straight. Woo!